Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of MMT Mondays. In tonight's episode, we're going to look to the past in order to see that we can dare to dream for more than the bare minimum going forward in a post-COVID world. Instead of continuing along with the status quo, we have the ability to reimagine how we view infrastructure in society today. While many pundits refuse to see how racial and economic equality are interconnected, if we only look back in time to former Vice President Henry Wallace, we can see that molding them together provides us a framework for a people's revolution that will usher in a modern version of the century of the common man. Hours of history facing fascism in World War II, Vice President Henry Wallace stood out as a symbolic vision of what humanity could achieve in a post-World War II world. Wallace saw that we couldn't crawl back into an isolationist stance, but must look outward to truly be our brother's keeper on a worldwide scale. In 1942, Wallace made his most well-known speech referred to as the Common Man speech. In it, he outlined what he hoped America and the world could be after World War II was over. In the speech, he outlined ideas like equal pay for equal work amongst all races and genders, and an end to military and economic imperialism by European colonizers and the United States. The speech, and Wallace himself, ended up enjoying widespread working class support around the free world. While Wallace became the hero of the people, he was an enemy of the elite. Politicians, industrial leaders, and Wall Street had accumulated wealth and power through imperialism and exploitation of the workers, and they viewed Wallace's vision as a threat to their power. World War II was also more than a foreign issue. American manufacturing profited immensely from the production of armaments and vehicles. Despite the influx of money, workers' wages remained the same. As a result, this era saw more strikes by workers than at any other time in American history. This divide between workers and owners was most notable in Detroit, which was a key manufacturing city. Detroit had recently seen a massive influx in the black population being forced to flee racial terrorism in the South. Jim Crow and racial inequalities resulted in violence between the black community and the entirely white Detroit police force. After touring Detroit following a heinous race riot, Wallace famously stated that we cannot fight to crush Nazi brutality abroad and condone race riots at home. Wallace saw that we could not claim to be the champion of democracy if we treated everyone that didn't look like me as a second-class citizen at home. Sadly though, corruption and capitalistic greed prevented Wallace's vision for the century of a common man from becoming a reality. While Wallace's speech was set in the context of World War II fighting the Nazis, the crux of the speech continues to see many of the same protagonists and obstacles in our society today. As we go through this speech of Wallace's Century of the Common Man, see if you can see how the issues that America faced during Wallace's lifetime are the same issues that we continue to face today. It is worthwhile to refresh our minds about the march of freedom for the common man. The idea of freedom, the freedom that we in the United States know and love so well with its extraordinary emphasis on the dignity of the individual. Upon our nation's founding in 1776, the march of the common people had just begun. Most of them did not yet know how to read and write. There were no public schools. Men and women cannot really be free until they have plenty to eat and time and ability to read and think and talk things over. They have learned, and we are still learning, the art of production, how to make a living. They have learned and are still learning the art of self-government. If we are to measure freedom by standards of nutrition, education, and self-government, we might rank the United States and certain nations of Western Europe very high. Everywhere, reading and writing are accompanied by industrial progress, and industrial progress sooner or later and inevitably brings a strong labor movement. Everywhere, the common people are on the march. By the millions, they are learning to read and write, learning to think together, learning to use tools. They're learning to think and work together in labor movements, some of which may be extreme or a little impractical at first, but which eventually will settle down to serve effectively the interest of the common man. When the freedom-loving people march, when the farmers have an opportunity to buy land at reasonable prices and sell the produce of their land through their own organizations, when workers have the opportunity to form unions and bargain through them collectively, and when the children of all the people have an opportunity to attend schools which teach them the truth of the real world, when these opportunities are open to everyone, then the world moves straight ahead. The March of Freedom of the past 150 years has been a long, drawn-out people's revolution. In this great revolution of the people, there was the American Revolution of 1775, the French Revolution of 1789, the Latin American revolutions of the Bolivarian era, the German Revolution of 1848, and the Russian Revolution of 1917. Each spoke for the common man in terms of blood on the battlefield. Some went to excess, but the significant thing is that the people groped their way to the light. More of them learned to think and work together. The People's Revolution aims at peace and not at violence. But if the rights of the common man are attacked, it unleashes the ferocity of the she-bear who has lost a cub. The truth is that when the rights of the American people are transgressed, as these rights have been transgressed, the American people will fight with a relentless fury. The people are on the march towards an even fuller freedom than the most fortunate peoples of the world have hitherto enjoyed. The people in their millennial and revolutionary march towards manifesting here on earth the dignity that is in every human soul hold as their credo the four freedoms enunciated by President Roosevelt in his message to Congress on January 6, 1941. These four freedoms are the very core of the revolution for which the United Nations have taken their stand. We who live in the United States may think that there is nothing very revolutionary about freedom of religion, freedom of expression, and freedom from fear. But when we begin to think about the significance of freedom from want for the average man, then we know that the revolution of the past 150 years has not been completed, either here in the United States or any other place in the world. We know that this revolution cannot stop until the freedom from want has actually been attained. This peace must mean a better standard of living for the common man, not only in the United States and England, but also in India, Russia, China, and Latin America. Some have spoken of an American century. I say that the century on which we are entering, the century which will come into being after this war, can and must be the century of the common man. Perhaps it will be America's opportunity to support the freedoms and duties by which the common man must live. Everywhere, the common man must learn to build his own industries with his own hands in practical fashion. Everywhere, the common man must learn to increase his productivity so that he and his children can eventually pay to the world community all that they have received. No nation will have the God-given right to exploit other nations. Older nations will have the privilege to help younger nations get started on the path to industrialization. But there must be neither military nor economic imperialism. Modern science, when devoted wholeheartedly to the general welfare, has in it potentialities of which we have not been able to yet dream. International cartels that serve American greed must go. Cartels in the peace to come must be subjected to international control for the common man, as well as being under adequate control by the respective home governments. With international monopoly pools under control, it will be possible for inventions to serve all the people instead of only the few. Yes, and when the time of peace comes, the citizen will again have a duty. The consumer will have a duty, the supreme duty of sacrificing the lesser interest for the greater interest of the general welfare. Those who write the peace must think of the whole world. There can be no privileged peoples. We ourselves in the United States are not a master race. We cannot perpetuate economic warfare without planting the seeds of military warfare. We must use our power at the peace table to build an economic peace that is charitable and enduring. If we really believe that we are fighting for a people's peace, all the rest becomes easy. Production? Yes. It will be easy to get production without either strikes or sabotage. There can be no half measures. North, south, east, west, and middle west. The will of the American people is for complete victory. The people's revolution is on the march, and we who fight in the people's cause will never stop until that cause is won. Thankfully, Henry Wallace's story doesn't have to reside as a pie-in-the-sky dream of the past. Wallace understood that in rebuilding our economy following the war, we cannot revert back to the status quo. In working to rebuild our infrastructure and economy, Wallace saw that a Jim Crow version of America was a relic of the past. Wallace envisioned a future where the United States started to live up to its billing as a land of opportunity for all, not just some. An America and global society that embraced and highlighted our diversity instead of grasping for a decrepit system of white supremacy. Much like Wallace's vision nearly 80 years ago, we cannot afford to revert back to the pre-COVID status quo once we reach the light at the end of the pandemic. We have the means and resources to finally live up to Wallace's vision of the century of the common man. If we can ever remove the blinders of austerity neoliberalism and dare to once again dream of bold progressive policies, we can achieve this. Instead of simply focusing on physical infrastructure like roads and bridges, we must invest in social infrastructure. Policies like a federal job guarantee, defunding the police, Medicare for all, a global Green New Deal, and reparations can help us achieve the bigger picture of providing the common man with the freedom from want that Wallace proclaimed nearly a century ago. Henry Wallace realized that the post-World War II economy had to be able to account for the returning soldiers as well as protect the economic rights of women who had entered the labor force due to the war. Wallace saw that the best way to achieve that freedom from want was a job guarantee program. Similar to Wallace, a federal job guarantee stands as the bedrock for true economic and racial justice today. Under a job guarantee program, the federal government would hire all of those willing and able to work at a living wage. The program would not only address the problems of unemployment, however. A job guarantee would provide needed and meaningful services to communities across the country.
A job guarantee solves something that a UBI does not. Providing a job for every person that can't find work. The UBI provides cash. Cash only gets you what you can afford. If your health care costs you $50, but your UBI is only $49, you can't buy health care. If your rent is $1,500 and your UBI is only $1,000, you can't pay your rent.
I'm 22. I have a 1-year-old son. I'm a single mom. I make $7.50 an hour at McDonald's. Nothing.
But with universal, what happens is the entire economy levels out. It becomes a status quo. That guarantee has to continue to rise constantly for it to become truly effective, but the production needs to match the rise in the prices. Unfortunately, that's not how this is set up. None of the proposals are set up like that. And you've seen how they've been with Social Security. That should be a real red flag.
I've been homeless for approximately 5 years now. I'm drawing my Social Security, but it's not enough to pay for my rent.
What you really have is the gateway drug for libertarians to eliminate public space. They don't need everybody. They don't want everybody. They believe that it's important to keep a certain number of people unemployed by making the onus, putting the onus on the individual to provide for themselves, to make good choices.
You know, this idea and this metaphor of a bootstrap started off as a joke because it's a physical impossibility to lift yourself up by a bootstrap, by your shoelaces. It's physically impossible. The whole thing is a joke.
From my vantage point, people think cash is king. Is your UBI going to pay for healthcare? Probably not. Is your UBI going to pay your rent? Probably not. And so this is one of those key things that facilitates the gig economy, the Uberization of America. It is the Trojan horse. We are really, really trapped by a propaganda campaign that has kept us with diminished imaginations and diminished dreams. Imagine a married woman who's been abused is stuck in a horrible situation. When you give her a federal job guarantee with a hashtag living wage, now all of a sudden she can leave. Talk about mobility. We've got new mobility for an underclass that has never had a chance. A UBI will never give them that. We're not just throwing cash at the problem. We're actually providing the structure so other people can't leech off of it. Powers that be, the power elite can't leech off it and benefit from it once again. If you look at reparations, the concept of reparations has absolutely got to be more than a cash payout. Ayanna Pressley is putting a bill out right now. This job guarantee is the greatest bill I've seen in a long, long time. As far as democratizing employment.
Mr. Bezos, you are worth $182 billion. That's a B. 182 billion. You're the wealthiest person in the world. Why are you doing everything in your power to stop your workers in Bessemer, Alabama, from joining a union so that they can negotiate for better wages, better benefits, and better working conditions?
This is as close to a national co-op, a public option for employment. We're not talking about dig a hole, fill a hole, dig a hole, fill a hole. All you have to do is read Pavlina Treneva's book on the federal job guarantee.
There are numerous misconceptions when it comes to the push for defunding the police. Studies show that black people experience excessive force at the hands of police at more than twice the rate of white people. Historically, policing has been used to either oppress or quash minority communities and class struggles. Similar to Henry Wallace's anger over the treatment of African Americans in Detroit during World War II, if we are to make this modern-day century of the common man, we must invest hope and tangible resources into the communities most affected by police brutality.
People have a lot of opinions about policing, and our ideas about policing are shaped by our race, our genders, our class, and our parents. For example, most white people have very little interaction with police. In a recent study, 77% of white people had no contact with police in the previous year. Of those who did, at least half were traffic stops. And in many cases, white people initiated contact by calling the police. Since they have little unwanted contact, many white people's opinions about policing are not based on personal experience. Dominant culture, especially mass media, sells us the image of officer-friendly. But whose experience is that actually based on? The same study found that black people experience excessive force at the hands of police at more than twice the rate of white people. Did we have a just and equitable police force and something went wrong? No. Policing in the South emerged from the slave patrols in the 1700s and 1800s that caught and returned runaway enslaved people. In the West, police departments were formed to keep Native people out of cities built by white settlers. And in the North, the first municipal police departments in the mid-1800s helped quash labor strikes and riots against the rich, and policed public spaces to conform to middle-class white morality around gender and sexuality and exclude poor, unhoused, or disabled people. Policing in the U.S. began as a system of economic, social, racial, patriarchal, and ableist control. And that is what it still is today. The truth is police don't do what most people think they do. Police spend more than half of their time responding to non-criminal calls and traffic issues, and only 1 to 3% of their time responding to violent crime calls. Police don't stop violence. They respond to violence that has already occurred, and they respond with their own threat of violence, and that response is not equitable. When people of color are involved, police often engage violently. Yet we spend an astronomical amount of money on the police, over $100 billion a year. Let that sink in. The demand to defund the police is about minimizing the role and power of police in our society. It's about demanding that the government stop writing blank checks for racist control, containment, and punishment. Defunding the police is also about recognizing that police do not solve or address any social issues. They do not prevent harm. What if we took that $100 billion and invested it in our community? What if we had housing, access to healthy food and clean water, health care, healing, cooperative businesses, education, child care, parks, art, and community services? If you already have those things, great. But that's not the reality everywhere. Ask yourself, if we have the resources, why doesn't everyone have this?
As Professor Fadhel Kaboub states in this next clip, our planet is literally on fire. Our entire planet faces an existential crisis that we cannot continue to ignore. We don't have time for incremental change. Just like the Great Depression, we need a new global Green New Deal that constrains the power of finance, reduces inequality, and saves our planet. As Dr. Kaboub said, we need to change the engine of the economy that produces inequality, oppression, poverty, and pollution. We not only have the ability to transform our economy, but we also don't have the financial constraints holding us back either.
Is the planet on fire? All right, that's why we're here today. You're here because you care. You're here because this is a crisis. Thank you to all our organizers, and thank you for all the young people who are here, and all of you for supporting the climate strike today. My name is Fadhel Kaboub, and I teach economics at Denison University. Yes, I'm an economist. Yes, I'm an economist, but I'm not one of those. Not those economists who were wrong about climate change. They were wrong about economic inequality. They were wrong about poverty. They were wrong about the financial crisis. They were wrong about everything. And yet they still ask us to take their word for it. They say, the Green New Deal is too expensive. It's too bold. We can't afford it. What do they say? They say, let's try something simple, experimental, incremental. We don't have time for experimental and incremental. 12 years to go. We have 12 years not to think, not to sit down and reflect on the last 30 years. We've known about this since Silent Spring. We've known about this for a long time. We have 12 years to act on a massive global scale, not small. Global scale. That's why I support the Green New Deal, because the Green New Deal is not incremental, it's not small, it's bold. It's about changing the entire engine of the economy, not just changing the tires and changing the oil. No more oil. We're changing the entire structure that produces inequality, that produces poverty, that produces oppression, that produces pollution. We want to transform the entire economy, and guess what? We can't afford it. The part that we can't afford is the status quo. We're already paying too much. Think about it this way. Would we rather clean the water source or pay for cancer treatment for the next 30 years? Would we rather have after-school programs to inspire kids with music and theater and sports and build the next generation of leaders? Or not do that because it's too expensive, and then build prisons for the young people of the next generation? This is why I support the Green New Deal. The numbers are very clear. All the polling numbers are very clear. The vast majority of people support the Green New Deal, support Medicare for all, support all of the progressive policy ideas. And it's true for Republicans and independents too. The only people who don't support this are elected officials in Washington, D.C., their lobbyists, and the media people who push their ideas. We outnumber them. We have the numbers. If you don't support the Green New Deal, if you don't support bold action against climate change, we're coming for your seat. We're going to unseat you. How do we pay for it? Can we afford it? Where is the money? The federal government pays for it the same way we paid for World War II. World War II came after the Great Depression, the most miserable time in world history. There was no money to be taxed. There was no money to be borrowed. But we had a major crisis, and the government spent money into existence, made it a priority. We didn't tax anybody before World War II. The taxes came after. We didn't borrow from anybody before World War II. The borrowing came after. This is how the federal government spends all the time on all the priorities. We just have to make them set the priorities straight and spend on fighting climate change, spend on Medicare for all, spend on reparations, spend on fixing inequality. We don't need to wait for the next 50 years to go extinct, because once we're gone, planet Earth, nobody's gonna miss us, right? This is about us. We're here as custodians of this planet. We don't own this thing. We don't have a right to it. Nobody has the right to privatize the land, privatize the water, privatize anything. We don't need anybody's permission to put in place a Green New Deal. We don't need money for the rich. We don't need taxes from the rich, but we should still tax them. We tax them to reduce their power and influence in politics. We tax them to reduce inequality. We should tax the fossil fuel industry to drive them out of existence, not because we need their money or their permission. We tax Wall Street not because we need their money or their permission to fund healthcare for all. We tax them because they're too rich and too oppressive of the system that we live in. That's how we pay for the Green New Deal. Set the priorities straight, change the system, and Morganize. Vote for Morgan Harper. Support all the progressive organizations here. Follow them on social media and get to your neighbors, get to your schools, organize. The numbers are in our favor if we act. And finally, I grew up in the Middle East, and I have to say something about that region. Climate change is a global thing, and it's happening, and it's massive. And climate refugees have been on the move for years already. They just don't carry IDs that says I'm a climate refugee. The Syrian refugees started moving 3-4 years before the first bullets were fired because of climate change, because their livelihood was destroyed. And we're talking about millions of people who will be on the move in the next few years, some of them already on the move. That part, that's the part we can't afford. We have millions of people who want to work. We have the planet on fire. We have technology that's getting cheaper and more accessible by the day for renewable energy. We have to put those things together and create a better, more prosperous, more sustainable world for all of us, for the next generations. Thank you again for being here.
As we will see in our next clip, economist Sandy Darity provides a detailed account of 3 different phases of oppression towards the Black community throughout our nation's history that directly contributed to why we need a comprehensive reparations program. These atrocities have resulted in a gulf of disparity in wealth between black and white people, and it's the U.S. government's responsibility to right these wrongs. Henry Wallace railed against the continued exploitation of people across the globe due to racist colonialism and imperialism. Reparations serves as another way to build a truly equitable social infrastructure.
One of the key things that is at the heart of my thinking about the reasons why we have to have a reparations program, and it's a reparations program specifically for Black Americans who are descendants of persons who were enslaved in the United States, is because there are three phases of American history that are associated with a range of deep atrocities that were directed against the Black community. And it's those atrocities that merit or demand restitution. The first phase is the obvious one, which is the period of enslavement, which ranged from 1776 to 1865. The second is the period that lasted for almost 100 years following the end of the Civil War, of legal segregation in the United States. And then the third is the ongoing damages that have been inflicted on Black Americans in the period after the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And here I would include mass incarceration, I would include police killings of unarmed Blacks, I would include employment discrimination, and I would include perhaps what's most dramatic from my standpoint as an economist, the enormous racial gulf in wealth between Blacks and whites in the United States. So the U.S. government is the culpable entity, and the reason it's the culpable entity is because it established the legal and authoritative framework that made it possible for all of these atrocities to take place. If you look at the founding documents for the United States, the founding documents engrave in them the legality of slavery. If you look at the period of Jim Crow in the United States, there was no existing national legislation that was in place that would prevent the operation of acts of legal segregation both in the North and in the South. If you look at the current situation, there's no action that's being taken by the federal government to curb police violence that's directed against unarmed Blacks. There's no steps that have been taken to compensate people who have lost family members as a consequence of that violence, nor have there been any steps taken to compensate people for being subjected to unjust or unwarranted incarceration. So it's actually there's a national responsibility that's in operation here, and the national responsibility has to be met by the federal government.
As you can see, we can achieve our own modern version of Henry Wallace's Century of the Common Man. We outnumber them. We have the numbers. We must organize and demand a better future for not only ourselves, but for the countless generations to come. Our own people's revolution is on the march, and as we fight for the people's causes, we will never stop until that cause is finally won. So if you enjoyed tonight's video, make sure to check us out at realprogressives.org and subscribe to get notifications on new video streams in YouTube, Periscope, Facebook, and Rockfin. Thank y'all, and have a great week.